All right, well, good evening, everybody. We'll get started, and welcome to the September 1st edition of Eugene Water and Electric Board's monthly meetings. My name is Steve Mattel. I am the current president, and we will jump into the agenda checks. Anybody have any concerns that they'd like to air regarding the agenda as published? Well, this time I can see all 5 commissioners, 4 of them anyways. I guess I got to look in the mirror for the 5th, and I see Frank as well, and I see heads nodding in the direction. I was hoping they were going to nod. So we will get on with item number 2, which is actually our public input. I believe we have one person who has let us know ahead of time that she would like to speak, but there's some technical difficulties. So we will delay that and move on to items from board members and circle back to public input in about 10 or 15 minutes time. So items from board members, we will start furthest downriver as we would normally sit if we were in the real board meeting. So that means John Brown, you are first.
Well, thank you. Just one real brief thing. I just sent Frank a picture of some water conditions at Clear Lake, which is obviously the headwaters of the Mackenzie, that look less than appealing. And he said that you'd had staff up there earlier from somebody else that voiced some concerns. It's not lake wide, it's just in certain areas, but it's better to be proactive than reactive. So if you could kind of let me know what the status of that is, I'd really appreciate it.
Certainly will, Commissioner. In fact, well, after you sent me the picture, Karen Kelly forwarded the email from before. It's a little bit aged, so I'll make sure that it's appropriate for this condition, and we'll get back to you on it. And we'll copy the rest of the board as well.
Thank you. That's all.
All right, well, that leaves, I think I am next. Not much to report for August, other than the fact that I have my quarterly-ish phone meeting with the president of Subs Board. That's something we do every quarter, just to check in on how things are going. We talked a little bit, we've talked a lot about COVID policy and how each utility is managing that, and making sure that we're kind of just clear and aware of what each other is doing, and a handful of other things. One thing that we did discuss was just a smooth transition. Both he and I are transitioning off of our roles as president, and so we said we would make sure that our new president and theirs had a chance to meet, and perhaps we'll try and bring that just sort of kick that off in December prior to our departures from our positions. Other than that, I don't think I have anything to report. I'm trying to remember who's next. I can't even remember. Dick, is it you or Sonia? I think Sonia, you sit next to me next. All right, go ahead, please.
I don't have anything really to report. I did want to bring up a quick item that I'd like you all to think about. We can circle back on this perhaps next month, or Frank can weigh in, but something that I've urged that we do at my work is looking at having kind of more of a day to recover and recuperate and process whatever happens during the upcoming election, no matter what side or what your views are on it. I think there's a lot of people that will have a lot of very high opinions of it and probably need to process. And something we're doing at my work is taking that day off. And I know that, as a utility, that's not something that everybody could do, but it might be something to consider. So I'm just throwing it out there as an idea for us to kind of think about and consider as something to just, this year is very special, tensions are very high, no matter where you're at. It might be good to just give people time to process. So that's really all I had as an idea that I wanted to put out there. And other than that, it's been an interesting month, and I'm glad we've made it through another one. So thanks, everyone.
Commissioner Helgeson.
Thank you. I don't have much this evening, principally because I've been out of town for all but 4 days of the past month. And so I'm just now in the process of getting through all of my backlog of emails. I made one pass and found that there wasn't a lot in there that was too urgent, but I would apologize to anybody who I've perhaps inadvertently offended by not getting back to them right away. as I just got back into town last night. I have, however, had a chance to review all of tonight's board materials, and we'll get through the rest of my inbox tomorrow. And so if you're waiting, you should hear from me soon. Thank you.
Commissioner Schlossberg.
Well, it's been a very quiet month for me, so I have nothing to report.
All right, Frank, it's your turn. You can, and I think we'll also just jump right into your COVID-19 update. Oh, and I think you're muted, Frank, or at least I can't hear you.
You were correct. I was muted. Thanks, President Mattel. Good evening, commissioners. I do have a brief COVID update for you this evening. We provided a pretty detailed report as part of our quarterly reporting to the board last month. So this will be a pretty quick and high level, more recent update. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, I can get started. We continue to monitor external conditions. I particularly presented this format where we're looking at case rates per 100,000 and also positivity test rates.
Frank, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I don't think everybody was on the phone when Ann was explaining that at the base of your screen, you should see, I think, yourself, but also the slides. And so it's your choice. You can toggle. You can look at the view of all the folks who are online, or you can click on that and see a blow up of the slide that Frank's on. Sorry about that, Frank. I don't think everybody caught those directions.
Yeah, no worries, President Mattel. I wanted to mention this particular format partially because this is the type of data that the school districts are using for, or the state is using for their criteria to guide either school reopenings or partial reopenings or hybrid programs. EWEB has about 140 employees who've expressed that they have some kind of school scheduled issue request to deal with. And so that's why we look at it in this format, amongst a lot of other formats as well. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Slide 6. One of the things that we continue to monitor, and this is some of our charts get so complex. I know President Mattel, this is one of your favorites. It just has so much consumption information on it that we have nicknamed this the Adam Root chart, named after the creator. It really looks at a daily consumption record. What we're seeing so far from March through July on the electric side is about a 4.5% decrease in consumption that can be traced to kind of the partial closing, the economic impacts of COVID. Oddly enough, a little bit of an increase on the water side that could be for a number of reasons, people staying home, watering gardens, that type of thing. We don't know exactly, but we continue to monitor consumption pretty closely. We have forecasted going forward economic impacts of about 5% on the electric side for consumption. So it's tracking with that. It was about 2% in August, which was a little lighter than that. So we monitor this daily, month by month, week by week, to make sure that we're understanding consumption patterns. Also relative to weather, weekend conditions, key accounts, a number of other things that weigh into our consumption, and so we continue to monitor that pretty closely. Go ahead to slide 7, please. This is something we also continue to work on. It's a chart showing some of our activity relative to the aging of payments. You can see, I'll just describe the bars there are actually the number of disconnect service orders, the number of people that would be on the list to disconnect. And you can see really through about March, that was holding pretty steady, 300, 500. And then when we voluntarily put a moratorium on disconnects and shutoffs, that you can see those bars steadily going up to well over 3,000. And so, and then throughout this period, roughly in about May or June, we started to increase our number of programs and payment terms that we were offering customers, you start to see a general trend down. And then in kind of mid to late July, we started communicating that we were going to, not under exactly the same conditions, but in some cases disconnecting customers as a last resort. And all of a sudden, early August, you see a dramatic decrease in the number of disconnects, as well as the blue line, for example. You can almost see an immediate drop in the 90-day aging, which was the oldest, most aged accounts receivable that we had. And so we continue to monitor that. This is the first of the month, for example, where we have our kind of open enrollment period for aid applications. And so some of the data from this morning, actually on that, we had about 404 spots open, and as of 2 o'clock this afternoon, 56 applications had been received. So not fully subscribed either last month or this month. And so there is aid available for people to take advantage of if needed. So really interesting to see what happens when you look at aging versus disconnects versus overlaying that with different programs as far as payment terms, processes, and services and other things that we're offering. So we felt that was a pretty interesting and important thing to track from a customer perspective. I think that's that was, again, a very brief update. We continue to operate in our reintegration phases, which is a combination of telecommuting and in person. We're continuing to get a lot of work done as far as meeting our objectives and continuing to work on accomplishing our goals, just doing it in a little different way. That's my update, President Mattel.
All right, well, I'll open up a queue for if anybody would like to ask Frank some questions regarding the COVID-19 update. I have one, but I'll hold on if anybody else. Oh, hold on a second. Let me make sure I can see everybody. There we go. Yeah, anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask? Oh, John, if you're speaking, you are muted.
Not anymore.
Too bad.
So we're good? Yeah, no, Frank, real quickly, the 91 plus, I noticed a pretty steep decline in the last few days. Is that because there was resolution to the people that were out 3 months, or did they get financial help, or what happened? Why did we see such a steep decline in the 91 plus category?
The general answer, Commissioner Brown, is that they have agreed to sign up for some of our special payment terms. For the most part, it's a little bit deceiving. Some of those have maybe have been abandoned accounts, students that maybe, for example, that might have just left, and even though we disconnected them, they're basically abandoned accounts. But for the most part, that's an indication that the most aging accounts are signing up for repayment terms.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Go ahead, Dick.
Can I unmute myself here? So Frank, the takeaway, and I really appreciate your giving us those statistics every month. It's a nice real-time view of how things are doing out there for customers. If I were to characterize my takeaway from that as being one that suggests that we're doing a pretty good job with additional payment terms and the available low-income support funds and other mechanisms of managing this, such that while we're still above what would normally be the level of disconnection activity, that continues to trend downward. And so far, both in terms of EWEB's needs and our customers' needs, that we're doing a pretty good job of managing it. Would that be a reasonable takeaway?
I think that's a good takeaway. For example, Commissioner Helgeson, the number of disconnect service orders as of today was down to 707. So, going from a peak of 3,000 down to 707, I think our customer service staff in particular is doing and communication staff's doing a really good job of trying to get people to sign up or be aware of the various aid terms and conditions and programs that we have. So I think that's a fair characterization.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Sonia? Go ahead.
I'm curious on the, I mean, I see obviously that we're going down and recovering some of those funds now. If we get into a situation again that it starts to ramp back up, you know, people start losing their work because they don't have childcare, other businesses start closing because they can't operate outside, those kinds of things. Is there a threshold at which, or are there covenants in place for any of the kind of debt service ratings? Is there any risk to us on that side of like having a certain number or a quantity of accounts that are kind of at risk or for this financial exposure? I don't know if any of the if any of them really factor that in or not. But.
Yeah, I think normally what they do, Commissioner Carlson, is they will look at the history of your delinquencies and in particular, so delinquent accounts. Historically, EWEB has been incredibly low. I don't know if the specifics of the numbers around aging, which would tend to be 30, 60, 90 days type of aging. I think they would look at that just as an overall ratio versus accounts receivable to see how much exposure you have. And then they would weigh that against what you have planned for reserves for bad debt, for example. I think they want to make sure that you have proper coverage of that. And I see Deborah Hart popped on, and Deborah, I hope you're shaking your head because that's typically what I would expect them to look at. But Deborah, you have anything to add to that?
No, I was nodding my head in the affirmative. They're going to look to our reserve levels and what we've budgeted for bad debt, as well as how we fare within the industry. And we're only reviewed periodically. It's not a monthly or quarterly event. Good questions.
Yeah, and I think also, if I recall, Deborah, we increased the budget to handle that in 2021. We increased the amount we thought might be at risk.
We did. We increased the amount that we thought would be at risk, and we are carving out the loans that we've done so that we can monitor, or those payment plans, so that we can monitor that AR separate from our other customer receivables and keep a close eye on it.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Deborah.
Last kind of financial related question. If there's an emergency declaration and any areas kind of get funding from that, is there funding that we could get for the kind of related to COVID debt that is unrecoverable?
That's a good question, Commissioner. There has been some discussions. It might be something to ask Jason a little bit later when he does his presentation. There have been some discussions around state and federal aid that might be payable directly to the utility instead of through, for example, the LIHEAP program, which is where a lot of the funds are being channeled now. That might be a good question to just hold for him, because I know he's been tracking that pretty closely.
Okay, great, will do. Thanks.
Mindy, do you have any comments or questions? Okay, I just have a quick one. Let's see, Anne or Holly, whoever may be controlling the slides, would you just back up one slide to the slide everybody's been? Yeah, thank you. So Frank, can you just help me understand this? I'm looking at the very last day, 21st of August, and it shows something like 1,000 or slightly less accounts. How should I understand that? That means that's how many are active, are in some status of turn off, or that was the number that were issued in that particular day?
No, that's the cumulative total of disconnect service orders that we have that are in various states of scheduling.
Okay, so of the give or take 90,000 accounts that we have, this is on the electric side, I think, right?
Right.
That, something like 89,000 give or take are operating as normal, about 1,000 are in a disconnect mode of some sort, and that we're reaching out to those folks and working with them to reestablish connection once they agree to their payment plans.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Okay, great. We will move on unless anybody has any follow-up questions for Frank regarding COVID.
Thank you.
Okay. And my next item would be to go back to number 2 there and do public input. Can you let me know if anybody's available to speak?
Yes, Ms. Bishop has joined the meeting.
Oh, great. I'm glad that worked out well. In which case I will bang the gavel and open up a public testimony. Let me start by reading this mandatory statement. It's essentially for your benefit, Sandra, so I hope you're listening. No shenanigans. When your name is called, remember to unmute your call. Press 6 if you're calling from a landline. Please state your name and optionally your address or ward. Speak clearly to your telephone. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present her testimony. Please keep track of time. And if you need the board president, that's me, will notify you when your time has elapsed. After your testimony is heard, each of us commissioners will have an opportunity to speak if we choose, although by policy, we do not engage in a back and forth dialogue. Please note the failure of a commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to your testimony. If a question is presented by a speaker and the board does not provide an answer, an EWEB staff member will follow up with you afterwards. All right, I believe we have Sandra Bishop here to testify, and thanks for working through the technical issues. Sandra, go ahead.
Hello, this is Sandra. Thank you for, I want to especially thank Anne for helping me negotiate the technology to at least get on the phone. So thank you. My name is Sandra Bishop. My address is 4096 Hilliard Street here in Eugene. And thank you to the board for allowing me to address the board about the water storage tank project on Hilliard Hill off of 40th Avenue. My husband and I live in one of the houses most closely affected by the project. We are in the we're north of the favored site for the first tank at the extreme east end of the property, just at the dead end off of 40th and Donald. We moved to the property a little over a year ago. So as Commissioner Brown knows, we inherited a garden that was planted on EWEB property. So it's kind of funny being an EWEB commissioner and moving into a property that was utilizing the public land there. But tonight, I'd, in all seriousness, like to ask the EWEB board members to take a more direct role in the decisions being made on and about this project and the use of the property. If my understanding is correct, there's about 13 acres in this property, and the long-term goal is to have 3 water storage tanks sited there. Most of the acreage, I would say over half of the acreage on the site, is a mature fir pine habitat. There's no question that Eugene needs and deserves more water storage capacity. That's not the question, but the question is how to best use this piece of land that EWEB's been holding for so long. Specific points I'd like to address, and I do understand, and I'm not intending to invoke a give and take in this meeting tonight, but I do have some questions and things I'd like the board to be thinking about. One is there's confusion about whether or not there's a PUD approval process needed or not. And apparently it was assumed that there would be a PUD process. What changed? Now, all of a sudden the city saying, no, it's not required. So given that, will there be adequate time and opportunity for public input and an appeals process? And then the second thing is I'm disappointed to find that there will not be an RFP put out for an independent contract for environmental assessment of the property. And it's being done under another direct service contract with no competitive bidding. It's going to be done basically, it sounds like by the original firm or the firm that's doing the siting. I think that's a conflict of interest. I want more attention paid to the environmental practicalities of this site. So if the board can enter into that at all. There's a lot of talk about the value of the oaks in the open meadow as a habitat, which would need substantial enhancement. The oaks are not that old. Of course, it's a habitat. It's been empty for a long time, empty land. But I think there's an underestimation of the fir pine habitat. So what will be looking carefully at what will be the process for environmental assessment, and also specifically what is the zone verification process that is being talked about with this city. I've had some experience with land use. I don't understand that terminology and what it means. And so I guess bottom line, because I'm sure I'm running out of time, sorry, is that I really hope the board will take a much more engaged look at this project. There are incremental decisions being made, and they appear to be being made mainly on the staff level. And I, of all people, really trust the staff. And as a board member, you have to trust your staff and consultants. But I really do hope the board will engage a little bit more closely with this. Walk this property, look very carefully at it. We are being told that it's possible that one of the tanks can be within 30 feet of our property line, which means within 35 feet of our home. So this is a large site. I know there are a lot of constraints on it, but please look at the impact on some of the properties up at the north end here, and realize, I'm sure you all do, this is the largest capital project that EWEB will probably do in the next 50 to 100 years. I was trying to think of another project this size, maybe the water intake on the McKenzie River, but this is a major project. So I really hope that the board will really drill down and ask the specific questions at every turn on this project. So thank you so much for allowing me to testify tonight. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Sandra. Before we move into responses or feedback that is from the board, Ann, can you just let me know if anybody else happens to be out there?
No, Sandra was our only person to testify tonight.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So we will allow some time for any responses from commissioners. We will. I was just going to go right down the line, but Sonia, if you want to jump in, that's fine. Go ahead. Well, in that case, we'll just go right down the line. Commissioner Schlossberg, you're first.
Thank you, and thank you, Sandra, for your testimony. I just have a general question, I guess, for Frank. I feel like it's been a little while since the board has had an update on the reservoir replacement. Maybe it was only been a couple months, but everything is kind of blurring together. And I'm just wondering if we could have like more regular updates on what is going on with the process, even if things are kind of stalled due to COVID. But for me personally, sometimes it just gets hard to track if we don't talk about something for a few months. So that would be really helpful for me personally.
Commissioner Helgeson.
Thank you. Sandra, I appreciate your testimony tonight. It's good to hear from you. I can't see you, but it is good to hear from you. I can't respond to the questions about the land use process. I will point out, I did attend a meeting, I think it was back in February or March, when there was a neighborhood meeting on this, and I, like the rest of the community invited there, had an opportunity to hear more about the project. I do know, and I trust that the staff is doing as best they can to try to resolve issues and manage the trade-offs that you referenced, and I'm sure there are a host of others. I can't really respond to the land use issues, although I know that we had raised those with the city just to get clarity as to what the process was for our moving forward. And if it's perceived that there were any changes in our approach, it's probably as a result of whatever it is that we've heard back from the city. As far as board involvement is concerned, I too would like to have the opportunity to hear more about the project as it progresses. And my recollection is that we had a general kind of overview of the high-level improvements at the transmission and storage level that were anticipated as part of the capital plan, but that wasn't really focused in any detail on the kinds of things that are now coming up in the context of moving the project forward. So if there were an opportunity sooner than later to put something on the board agenda to get a more detailed briefing on this particular project. The other thing, I think I've had a chance to tour the site. It's been a while. I wouldn't mind doing it again. But if on a one-on-one basis, there was some way that staff could coordinate with those on the board who would have an interest in walking the site. Again, it's been a while since I've been up there. And I can appreciate that if the neighbors have had the opportunity to see and use this site as kind of open land for so long that, you know, there would be some concerns here. So while I fully support the need and the efforts that staff is making to get the project organized and moving forward, I also want to be sensitive to the issues for the neighbors. And if there's an opportunity for those of us that want to visit the site to do so sometime in the next month or so, then I'd be happy to do that. Thank you, Sandra.
Commissioner Carlson.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your testimony. Really appreciate you bringing up that important topic again. Yeah, my last recollection of this conversation was us looking at the communication plan for customers and the citizens in that area and what that would look like. And so obviously moving on to the next phase, I really appreciate that. I would love to hear the responses from staff to the questions that you raised, and also would mask up and head on out there and do a tour if we could do that. So count me in for that. Thank you.
I guess I'm next. I don't have anything to add beyond what's already been said, so I'll just defer to Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. Some good questions and responses. Sandra, thank you for your testimony. I understand your concerns, but I don't know if you're aware that we're under a mandate from the state to have College Hill removed very quickly, and staging of construction. If College Hill goes down, we have to have a backup, and Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a very time critical project. And I understand your concerns, but I also understand the concerns of what happens if we don't have water service to a large portion of our community, because we are going, they are going to be mandated that we shut down College Hill in a few years, and the construction is such that I think that it can't be staged. This is the best way to do it, absent many millions of dollars of additional construction costs on College Hill. So I understand your concerns, but also understand it's in urban growth boundary. It's an urban facility, and I think that we all know that things don't remain the same forever. So hopefully we'll be able to work through the differences. Thank you.
Frank, I'll give you a chance to respond on behalf of staff if you'd like to. You don't have to.
So thanks, President Mattel. Thanks to Ms. Bishop for the testimony. There's been a lot of correspondence and communications with neighbors. I think sometimes that when there's a neighbor who disagrees with the direction, then there's outreach to that person or to the board in the other direction. We'd be happy to give the board a tour. That's not an issue, and I'd be happy to have staff provide a little bit more detail to the board as to where we're at. The construction website also is available, which has regular and routine updates as well, and so we can do that. We do have a couple of staff members, President Mattel, who can provide a little bit more update if you wanted specifics, or we can just hold that and respond formally to the board and also schedule an update with the board as to the specific status. I'd sort of lean on you for that direction.
Well, I have not heard I believe, from any of the commissioners a particular request for information. I think that's true. I heard a request for the opportunity to walk the property, but I haven't heard any other kind of request.
Well, just for sake of seeing if there are others out there who would support this, if we're moving into the decision phase around discrete issues that are of significant concern to the neighbors, for which we either have alternatives or the board should at least be advised, I would appreciate the scheduling in the next month or two of just an update for whatever time it takes to kind of advise us as to where we're at, what are the key decisions around which there may be concerns, where are we landing, what flexibility, if any, do we have, and just a general update. I'm not saying that the board would take over control of the project or, bear down on you with our concerns, but I just want to be better informed as we kind of move towards the point where we're closing on some discrete decisions that relate to the kinds of issues that were raised in testimony. And if there's any other support for that, it doesn't have to be a hour-long presentation.
Just to be clear, I think what you're asking for is a backgrounder at the end of the day that answers those handful of questions. Is that right, Dick?
Well, no, I was actually, that'd be fine. And I realize we're going to get some sort of staff response to the specific items that have been raised here. But I guess I was more in the vein of asking for some time on a future board agenda that, would not be designed to kind of rethink everything, but just to, at least, if nothing else, give us a sense of what's being decided, what considerations have been taken into account, and kind of how that's all coming down as we begin to move this project into the implementation phase.
Okay, and then just to get
because
clear,
when I was briefed on this at the neighborhood meeting, we weren't quite yet at that point, and we were very open to dialogue, and I hadn't really heard where that had gone since then. So I just think that would be helpful.
let me just ask a quick question before we look for additional support. Just given Dick's limited time on the board, my same situation applies to me. I would assume he would want that presentation to happen no later than November, so we'd have at least a little bit of time to, to respond and act as he sees fit. December might essentially becomes too late. Is that reasonable then, Frank, given the, to put a presentation together, 20 minutes, 30 minutes in length? I don't know exactly, 10, it might just be 10 minutes. I take that part back. I don't want to put a time limit on at this point, but sometime either next month or the month after.
So given the fact that staff is already actively working this project, and the fact that we are in the kind of early design phases of it, I don't think it's going to be an extra burden on staff to provide information and communicate with the board as to what the plans are. We're in the process of doing ecological surveys. We're in process of doing design work. Those are all active, and we have a couple of choices. If we did something in November, we could include it as part of the quarterly update and just focus on that a little bit more as a relevant topic, or we can add it as correspondence, knowing that if the board wants to spend some time with that during correspondence, we could respond if the board has further questions, or we could do it as a separate item. A 30-minute item is I don't think an issue for the staff to respond to.
Dick, you want to just weigh in on which of those options?
I'm not particular about the manner in which we proceed with this. Let me just be clear about my interest. And I think it would be helpful if you're moving forward to just find an opportunity to advise us as to where we're at with these things and to gauge from the board's response our comfort level with what you're doing. My purpose is not to undo anything or to insert ourselves in the staff's work. In fact, my hope would be that we would just be adequately informed so that we could express a certain comfort level and maybe point to a thing or two that, in our view, might deserve a little additional attention. But I would be comfortable if there were a general support for some kind of follow-up along those lines that went beyond just simple correspondence. I would be happy for Frank and the officers to find a way to do that without messing up our agendas too much.
Yeah, President Mattel, I will, out of courtesy and respect for staff, I will follow up with our Chief Operating Officer, Rod Price, as well as Chief Customer Officer, who's also in charge of communications, to get their input on doing something as early as October, and sort of gauge that along with what we have else planned on the agenda. When we do get into November and December, sometimes we start getting into a number of rate making and financial and budgeting type of decisions. So it may actually work better into the agenda to do it in October. And I can follow up with the board, this week on that if that's appropriate.
Well, I was going to ask for a couple additional head nods, but looks like you wield substantial influence, Dick. We don't even need to do that. It's already been put on the October agenda. But let me do that anyways. Is there? My sense is there is additional support for this update so that the board can get familiar and comfortable with the latest. Is that true? Show of hands. I haven't enough of them.
I have a question, if I could.
Yeah, I'm going to say something first, and then you may as well. I just wanted to be clear, at least for my on my own behalf. Other members can speak as they like. That we have. While I'm not clear on all the details, and certainly not on the technical land use issues that Sandra Bishop raised, we were briefed on this before and made aware of its importance to the community, and I just want to say. On behalf of staff that may be listening, that this does, we expected some, pushback from community members, and certainly understand their discomfort with having, a lot of construction right near their homes, and in Sandra's case, immediately adjacent. But there is, as John Brown said earlier, the community interest that we're responsible for, and I just want to be clear with staff that that I'm still very strongly in support of moving forward with the project. But like Dick, it's nice to know some of the particulars to see if there's any opportunity at all to, satisfy both sets of concerns. Go ahead, John.
So, Frank, if you're going to give us an update in October, could you include in there what happens if this at Hilliard is delayed, what that does to the neighbors on College Hill? Because it sounds, what I've heard before, my understanding is that if we have to build College Hill without Hilliard, that it's going to be a significant impact on that particular neighborhood, much more than it would if we tore it down and had Hilliard to backfill it. Could you give us the statistics and the cost risks we're going there as well?
Yeah, I can just say with affirmity, Commissioner Brown, that there's a 2023 deadline to decommission College Hill, and the best avenue to do that is to first do the base level reservoir at East 40th. There's no question that facilitates the work at College Hill. That in essence comes first.
Thank you.
All righty, well, I will use the gavel once again and close out the public testimony and move on to board action items. Number 4 is the approval of consent calendar A, and in this case, it's the minutes and a sole contract, Mason, Bruce, and Gerard, for $400,000 spread over a 5-year period. Does anybody want to pull either of those two for discussion? John Brown wants to pull the minutes again. Is that right, John?
No, I want to pull Mason Bruce. I just have another question and a request.
All right. Well, in which case we will take a vote on the minutes alone, I guess. All those in favor of approving last month's minutes, please raise your hand so I can see it and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We'll have to work on that, but I think that was unanimous approval. And why don't you go ahead, John, with your concerns on Mason and Bruce?
Yeah, thank you. It's not a concern as much as it's about protocol and things about To me, it looks like we're over budgeting, and I have several questions, but because the backgrounder said, 50,000 a year, so I did the math on a 5-year contract, but yet we're asking for 400,000, and we got this bid by, and correct me, Deborah, or whomever is listening, by setting up a hypothetical survey, and they bid on that, and that's was the award criteria. But is there no criteria for any of these surveys? Because how are we going to know we got what we paid for? I mean, that's a lot of money to start out with over a 5-year period. And I know a lot of these terms for NSO, the Northern Spotted Owl Habitat, the woody debris, the snag creation, all of that. I do quite a bit of that, and I'm trying to grasp this thing. And so, is there any way none of this has been defined?
I guess I might call Commissioner on, I don't know if Mike McCann is available to respond to that.
I am. Yes, I'm here. And so, commissioners, this is a task order contract. So the $50,000 is our estimate of what will be required this year. So the first year of the contract, we estimated out over 5 years what we think it'll be. It's not $50,000 every year. We looked at all of the surveys required by the license over the first 5 years and estimated, what the cost for those would be. But each of the tasks will be issued separately and the budgets developed separately. So that's how we will know that we are getting what we are asked for. So, in year 3, we may have to do a, say, noxious weed survey around Carmen Diversion Reservoir. We'll ask for a specific budget for that project, and then we will approve that budget. The $400,000 is just a not to exceed for the total value of the contract, but each individual year will be budgeted separately. Each individual task will be managed separately.
Okay, thanks. Just to follow up then, so there is no defined tasks already. Who's going to define those? FERC or Forest Service, or who's going to define a noxious weed survey? Who's going to tell us to do that and the scope of that work? Is that EWEB implemented? Is that FERC implemented? Or who's going to do that, and under what standards? How do we know that,
Sure.
They're not going to give us a project that's going to cost us less or more?
So some of the things are already defined. And so, like, I'm a bit out of it at this point. So I'm going on memory. But we were originally required to do, say, a culturally significant plant survey of the entire project boundary as part of relicensing. We are to redo that within the first 5 years of license issuance. Same thing with the noxious weed survey. So there are some things that are very well defined, and we can put a pretty good estimate of the cost on those. There are other things that are less defined. So we are required to do a T&E plant species survey any place we are going to disturb ground for, say, fish passage construction. So once the fish passage design documents get produced, we'll be able to know where we're going to be disturbing the ground, and based on that, we'll be able to instruct the surveyors to go out and survey for T&E plant species. So, that's the part that's a little bit up in the air, but we will be managing the scope and we'll be managing the tasks, and the scope of the survey are defined by the license. So, it's really 3. It's T&E plant species, culturally significant plant species, and noxious weeds.
Okay, so we inventory them, and then if we find a bunch of noxious weeds, then there's another stage to that too. Is that correct? I mean, just the inventory is for a purpose. Yeah.
So we have, under the vegetation management plan, there's a requirement to work with the Forest Service on controlling noxious weeds, and a protocol for how we do that for each individual type of weed.
All right, thanks. And we can, if I want to check on this a year from now just to see how this went, I can easily do that, Frank?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to take you up there and we can go look at the weeds ourselves.
I can't wait to watch that 19 miles. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Commissioner Helgeson.
I don't want to get into it further here because I'm prepared to.
You don't want to get into the weeds? Is that what you were going to say?
No, yeah, right. The noxious weeds. It does raise an interesting question from a board controls and accountability standpoint, because what we have here, I think what we're essentially approving is staff's ability to do business with this consultant for really not a fully specified piece of work to the tune of up to $400,000. And so, unlike say a vehicle purchase, which, we put out a spec, it's a particular thing. There's a particular price. We look at the process, we look at the price, we look at what we're getting in return, and we can judge and hold you accountable for if that truck doesn't show up, then, then we can have an issue around that. In this case, you're just being authorized to do $400,000 worth of business with this company around a general scope of work that conforms with the requirements of the new license process. But we're not really involved from that point forward. And, the money that funds this going forward is just buried somewhere in the budget and generally not subject to review unless something goes bump around it and you exceed, for example, the $400,000. So just from a process and accountability standpoint, it's a little bit of an odd animal, more like a retainer for a legal consultant, where you're going to retain them to do a certain general scope of work, but that's going to be authorized on an individual task base. But even in this case, I'm not even sure it's tied directly to a schedule of hourly fees or whatever. So I'm just pointing out, while I'm prepared to both move for approval and to support this, that it puts the board in a bit of an awkward position, kind of procedurally, under those circumstances, and I'll just leave it there. I don't really need a response.
Well, I think that's a good point. So I'd like to, since I'm on here, I can say another thing. Commissioner Helgeson, when we brought the license to the board, or the settlement agreement to the board, and said, here's where we think we are, this is what we think it'll cost. We had everything sort of scoped out in really big round numbers. And so we had a number for this work in our spreadsheet when we said the project as envisioned will be basically break even for a 40-year license. Now we have a somewhat more refined number, and we have a consultant on board, but like I said a minute ago, each individual year we'll be looking at the projects in that year and budgeting for that work in that particular year. So I think as we get down into individual project level, it may not be visible to the board, but it will be in the budget that the board approves. And initially, a lot of this stuff, anything we can capitalize, we will capitalize, but eventually some of this stuff will roll into the O&M budget. And that was also envisioned as we were developing the long-term plan for license deployment.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? Frank?
Yeah, commissioners, I would just also remind us that while these are 5-year procurement approvals, these go through an annual review for performance. So like a lot of the other contracts that we do that are multi-year, these are reviewed for performance, typically by staff, but then the budgets are included for the board to approve on an annual basis. And there are times when they're significant enough that we will break out the visibility of those. I'm not sure 400,000 over 5 years would be something that would be that visible to the board, but it will be reviewed for performance annually.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say before we move for a motion that I think there's a good discussion, and I think in general the board expects that staff are managing things, even smaller dollar items such as this one. It's 400,000 spread over 5 years, but the Carmen project itself is millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's a relatively small piece, but the expectation generally is we manage as best as we can, get a good value for the money on behalf of the customers. And my own sense is we have every reason to believe that that's what we're seeing out of, through all the various controls that we have available to us. But just to remind staff, based on this discussion, that's always the expectation, to do the best that we can with the money that community's money that we have. Dick, are you satisfied, and John Brown for that matter as well?
Yeah, I'll I'll express my satisfaction by moving approval of this consent calendar item.
I'll second it.
All right, well, those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
And
Aye.
That was better. All right, there, we're moving on to consent calendar B. There are
Thank
two
you, Mike.
contracts up for consideration. Do I have a motion to approve? Excuse me, anybody want to pull one? Go ahead, Sonia.
I would like to pull number 4. I have a couple of quick questions.
Okay, in that case, we have the Alltech contract for $416,000 remaining. Do I have a motion to approve?
so moved.
Move to approve the others.
All right, for the record, moved by Brown, seconded by Carlson. All those in favor of contract number 3, the Alltech contract. Sorry, I think everybody knows what I meant. Please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that is approved. Sonia, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. So on this one, it said that there was some time frames on there that were too tight, and that's part of the reason why a number of the other bidders chose not to bid. And I'm curious if staff could speak to that a little bit and why such a tight time frame. Why, I guess.
Yeah, Sonia, can you hear me? Sound
Yes.
check.
Thank
Okay.
you, Rod.
Yeah, sorry, this is Rod. I'll turn my camera on, then everybody can tell. No, that's a great question, but timeframes are for construction season. And one of the things that I don't know if you've noticed, but business has not slowed down. If anything, it's picked up. There's a lot of projects going on. And so we were kind of surprised to only get one bidder, but on the other hand, there's a lot of work going on, and so we couldn't necessarily control that. But we are trying to get through the construction season, and it's a pretty short time frame because we got started a little late due to some of the COVID stuff. But hopefully we'll get it done by the end of the year.
Okay, so COVID related, and also some of the potential bidders have projects that are conflicting in that time frame. I just wondered if this was something that got pushed and why we didn't kind of bid on it. It just seemed like it was sort of last minute bidding. I understand if that's COVID related. Obviously that's challenging to deal with. But.
Right. No, we're just following the project timelines.
Okay.
And we had to do okay.
Yeah, that was pretty much my question, if there was anything around there. So thank you. That answers it. Move to approve.
Thank you, Rod.
Thanks, Rod. Do I have a second? I had a move to approve from Sonia. All right, well then I'll do it. I think I beat you to it, Mindy. So moved by Carlson, seconded by myself. All those in favor of contract number 4, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 Alrighty, that takes care of that business. We will move to general business items. We have 30 minutes on the clock for Jason reporting in from an undisclosed bunker somewhere in the Willamette Valley. Go ahead, Jason. The floor is yours. I will start a clock. You can go ahead, though.
Good evening, commissioners. It's good to be with you all tonight virtually. I'm sure you've all found it's been challenging to conduct public business during pandemic, but you've all adapted, and likewise your counterparts in Salem and Washington, D.C. have done the same to adapt. The work goes on. There's important decisions to be made. Next slide, please. While legislators certainly have the current pandemic outbreak at front of mind, they're not losing track on longer term issues, and there are many in the legislature who would suggest they need to keep their eye on the ball on another pandemic, one unfolding in slow motion relative to COVID. The governor has issued Executive Order 2004 on climate, which she's calling a cap and reduce order. It is in direct response to the failure of the legislature to enact carbon pricing legislation in the 2019 and 2020 legislative sessions. She's used existing air quality authority in the DEQ statutes to order specific actions for reducing emissions in industry, transportation, and natural gas. The electric sector is largely omitted. And that's because current statutes only give her partial authority to regulate emissions in the electric sector, only in-state generation sources and not emissions from imported electricity. Partial authority makes it very difficult to regulate that sector properly. And so I think it's probably prudent that the order largely omit electricity for the time being. There will be implications for the electric sector, however. In the transportation sector, one of the key tools the governor has targeted to reduce emissions is increasing the targets of the Clean Fuels program for transportation fuels. Electricity is an eligible fuel for credit generation in that program. And EWEB indeed is a registered credit generator and aggregator. We have been for several years now. So that will be the key tool utilized there. I did want to point out that the update of the Clean Fuels program, it's not just going to be higher targets and housekeeping. There actually will be some opportunities to explore strategic secondary objectives. For example, the Oregon DEQ is evaluating an option to use a credit multiplier, which is where 1 ton of carbon reduction would actually get credit for some multiplier like 1.5 tons. That could be done in order to move the needle on other strategic goals, targeted goals. For example, renewable hydrogen has a lot of potential to reduce emissions in the heavy-duty vehicle sector. I would say the costs have come down for electrolyzers. It's very close to penciling out, but it's still somewhat nascent as a technology where electric vehicles were 5 or 10 years ago. The state could certainly use a credit multiplier to help get things moving on the production of renewable hydrogen from clean electricity. Also, there are locations for EV charging infrastructure that are very strategic, say along a state highway, for example, where the state wants connectivity across the state for electric vehicles to charge along the way. There may be locations that are very strategic, but won't have high enough usage to generate the revenue necessary for the owner of the charger to recoup their investment, whether that be a third party or utility. So they could use a credit multiplier to help bridge that delta. Next slide, please. Back to issues more front of mind. Naturally, legislators in Salem, as well as Washington, D.C., are extremely concerned about all of the Oregonians in crisis during this pandemic. You may have seen in the newspaper, there's been an extension of the eviction moratorium, for example, in Oregon. There has been no utility shutoff moratorium in Oregon. That's a good thing. Washington and California did enact a moratorium. Oregon has held off so far, and I think that's in large part because consumer-owned utilities, and I think really led by EWEB, we've made a really strong case that the voluntary approaches of utilities are the most efficient and effective way without unintended consequences to address customers in crisis. We've proved that our approach is sound and the governor's listened to us. Obviously, utilities at the start of the pandemic, there was a voluntary suspension across the state of shutoffs by all the utilities. That was a sound decision at the time, but obviously not a sustainable policy indefinitely. And in fact, I think the slide and the data points that Frank displayed for you all earlier, they actually demonstrate that a ongoing suspension of shutoffs may not actually be in the interest of our customers. I think actually we found that resuming some level of normal collection policies has proved very crucial to incent customer utility interaction, which is so crucial right now. We really need the utilities and the customers to connect so we can find out what's going on so that we can get payment plans set up. We can also help get customers that need it connected up with a bill assistance, whether it be EWEB's program funded by ratepayers or if it's state or federal resources. So, I think really the approach to resuming collection policies is sound, and it's important to stress it's not business as usual there's certainly a much more lenient approach to reconnection fees and deposits. So also, you know, we demonstrated to the governor and the legislature that our approach was sound, but we also reminded folks that, you know, our resources to provide assistance to customers were limited, and we needed the cavalry. And to that end, EWEB and many other Oregon electric utilities successfully lobbied the state to allocate $15 million out of their federal CARES Act allocation towards energy bill assistance. And EWEB really, I think, had a leading role. We really were a leader statewide in our own assistance program. We had a lot of credibility in that effort. And I think it's great that Oregon took this step. We're only the second state in the country to use CARES Act dollars for that purpose. And we should extend a thank you to the governor and the legislature for making that happen. Next slide, please. Looking ahead a bit to 2021, no surprise, given the grassroots efforts to pass cap and invest legislation in Salem and coming so close, there will definitely be cap and invest legislation reintroduced in 2021. The outcome of 2021 legislation on that topic is highly dependent on the ability for the Democratic majority in Salem to accomplish a quorum to do business and hold a third reading and vote on that legislation. That means it's highly likely we'll probably know the fate of cap and trade the day after the November election. If a legislative route appears closed off, coupled with some issue fatigue in the legislature on carbon pricing, it won't be surprising to see a pivot to sector-specific command and control type policies. We've already talked about the governor's executive order on climate. We talked about how that does omit the electric sector. And so that's a vacuum you could expect to be filled with legislative action. Next slide, please. Indeed, I think there's a very high probability that if cap and trade, cap and invest legislation is not successful, it's going to result in the return of RPS legislation that would increase RPS targets. Also, since the last time Oregon took action on clean energy targets, Washington and California have taken a step forward to 100% clean variants. I think as a utility that's on record supporting carbon pricing as the least cost approach to reaching Oregon's targeted greenhouse gas emissions, an approach that is technology neutral, market-based, and economy-wide, that will be somewhat of a bitter pill to swallow. But if we identify that this is the direction the legislature is going to go, I think it will be very incumbent upon EWEB to try to take as many of the lessons learned and as much of the data and the findings we've made on a least cost policy approach to reducing carbon and apply that to any RPS legislation that moves forward in Oregon. Centrally, I think the place to start would be calling for hydropower or really any non-carbon emitting form of electric generation to have full-fledged qualifying electricity status under the Oregon RPS. And that means REC generating status, the generation of renewable energy certificates. Hydropower does have some compliance value in the existing Oregon RPS, but it's not sufficient. It does not have parity with wind and solar. And if we're going to reach the finish line of a clean energy system in the Northwest at an affordable cost, we have to make it technology neutral. So I think that would be the central recommendation from staff on how EWEB would position itself on any RPS legislation. And also, I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen in California, some challenges to operating the grid reliably as we add more and more dynamic renewable generation. And so it probably will be very advisable for the state of Oregon to acknowledge that. And I think the last thing we want to have is a grid operator struggling to keep the lights on to have in the back of their mind the idea that there's punitive compliance consequences when they're trying to keep the lights on. I think Washington State seems to have done a pretty nice job in their recent 100% clean legislation in establishing reasonable off-ramps for reliability, and we would do well to import those Washington elements into Oregon legislation. Next slide, please. We did want to give you an informational update on something I'm sure you will see in the news soon. The Columbia River Systems Operations Environmental Impact Statement is expected to be finalized and a record of decision made later this month. That's in response to legal challenge. The Army Corps of Engineers formulated a new CRSO EIS. Staff assessment is that this is a collaborative and flexible EIS for the operation of the federal hydro system. We think it's a nice balance of fish benefits and power benefits. This would be an oversimplification of a very complex and nuanced document, but the real centerpiece of the EIS is making permanent the temporary flexible spill agreement in the Pacific Northwest for the federal hydro system. Flexible spill is the idea that increased court-ordered spill, rather than occurring 24 hours a day, can be accomplished strategically, where spill occurs at hours of the day when energy demand is lower, prices are lower, and the grid is cleaner, and spill is foregone at those times when the grid is, when demand is higher, when the grid is dirtier, and prices are higher. So it's a flexible approach, and I think it's balanced and it's collaborative. It's a good interim strategy for the region, and it's a potential springboard for additional collaboration. As you all know, the courtroom has a time and a place for settling policy matters, but it's somewhat of a blunt object sometimes. And a regional collaboration could have a more strategic approach to answer questions about the long-term future of Columbia River Systems operations. One topic that would entail would be the future of the 4 lower Snake River dams, and that is a controversial matter. The EIS does not address the future of the Snake River dams. It certainly did not identify breaching as a measure. The collaboration could be accomplished through a 4-state process. The states of Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Montana are right now discussing how to create a venue, a platform, a process to discuss collaboration and decision-making about the long-term future of the federal hydro system. That's encouraging. It certainly does not ensure that there won't be further legal challenge, but it's possible that this time around, the state of Oregon, which has been an outlier, they may pursue non-legal solutions, and they may stay at the collaborating table instead of going back to the courtroom. And that would be a positive for efforts to find some kind of regional consensus long-term on the federal hydropower system. Next slide. I'm done. I'm ready for any questions you have.
All right, well, thanks, Jason. If everybody can, boy, anyway, forget that. We have about 15 minutes remaining. I'm gonna open up a queue. Sonia, looks like you want to jump in first. Go ahead.
Well, I'll repose the question that I posed earlier. I'm curious if you've come across any legislation or funding that looks at the customers that have been impacted, particularly through the CARES Act. I don't know how the funding is allocated specifically, but for the accounts that we likely won't be able to recover funding from, if that climbs significantly, would any of that funding be able to be used to kind of offset those accounts that they're just not recoverable? I'm just looking at the future and thinking right now it's manageable, but who knows going into the winter, when electricity rates and heating, we have much higher bills during the winter time, and may have a much higher risk as some of these other funds kind of dry up. So
yeah, well, to that end, to reiterate, first, the Federal CARES Act that was passed, I want to say April, that allocated $9 million in LIHEAP funds to Oregon, and then obviously the state took action on top of that and programmed the $15 million for a LIHEAP-like program, even though it's not LIHEAP. So that's a combined $24 million. I don't think the state is very far, or the Community Action Agency network, they are not very far in doling out those dollars and processing claims. So there's a lot of assistance that's just now and continuing to hit the streets. As we mentioned, I think it's possible that the resumption of collection practices is going to help result in more people getting connected up with that assistance. Now, with that said, while it's fantastic that Oregon programmed those additional dollars, it's not going to meet the need in the state of Oregon. There's a lot of hope that, just for example, I would say to date, the combined amount of money programmed in the Federal CARES Act, that's probably only equal to what was programmed in the 2010 financial crisis. This may be a more extreme event than that. And so additional need is out there. There is the HEROES Act that was passed by the House of Representatives in DC that allocated $1.5 billion for additional LIHEAP funding, as well as $1.5 billion for water bill assistance, which would be the first of its kind. That bill was passed by the House. The Senate has not yet acted on its own version. There are negotiations underway right now. I will tell you, it is difficult to get a bill passed this close to the election. And as much as I would love to tell you action could happen before then, it's probably more likely a negotiated bill would be passed after the election. But what I can tell you, what I do know about the Senate bill, the bill was not released in full written form, but one thing that the Senate had proposed was forgivable loans that would go directly to utilities. And when the forgivable component, as I understand it, the portion of bad debt that any utility ends up having to eat, that would be the forgivable portion of the loan. But I'd have to go back and get more details. So we're in a holding pattern when it comes to federal assistance. I do think there will be some, but it's hard to say that it will be here before the election.
Okay. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And while I'm obviously concerned about the finances of the utility, as a board member, we have to be. Obviously, I'm very thankful for all of the work that has been done at the various levels of government, and for whatever role that you played in that, to make sure that our customers and community members are receiving financial aid, because electricity and water are basic services, and making sure that we can continue to provide that for customers during these really challenging times. And when those funds dry up, I mean, I think I would like to see in the future, as we're starting to hear that those funds are drying up, or we're kind of getting to the end of what we've allocated, we just need to keep having conversations about this and seeing what we can do to continue to advocate to carry people through this. I'm just deeply concerned about when those funds run out and what will happen to those people who need those services. So thank you.
Agreed, Commissioner. And I did want to stress, I think one niche that EWEB has really filled is reminding people of the challenges of small businesses. There's a lot of focus on low-income Oregonians and job loss, but small businesses are in crisis, and we know that some of those small businesses, if they go away, they may well never come back. And so I think we've filled a niche in Salem to spotlight the plight of small businesses, and there is some assistance available for small businesses through Business Oregon, but there's also additional unmet need for small business assistance as well.
All right, we'll move on in the interest of time. We have just 10 minutes or a little bit less now remaining in this 30-minute session. Anybody else have any questions or comments to share? Oh, well, what do you know? Well, in that case, thank you, Jason, for the report, and we'll move into our next item, which is a physical security program overview with Lisa Krentz. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, can you see me and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight to give you an overview of our physical security program. I'm Lisa Krantz, Operations Support Manager. Also joining me tonight is Ken Baldwin. He's our Physical Security Supervisor. Our goal this evening and for this presentation is to give you a high-level understanding of our physical security program, particularly in relation to current events. Next slide, please. Shown here is an overview of what we'll be discussing tonight. No board action is required. However, we are looking for additional feedback from you on what more information you'd like to see, either in quarterly reports or via another avenue. So be thinking about that as I'm walking through this presentation. Next slide, please. The formal mission and vision of the Physical Security Department was provided in the board backgrounder. I won't reiterate that here, but what we've done is we've boiled it down to a simple phrase. Our goal is to provide a safe and secure work environment so that employees can focus on their primary duties. As you know, as a provider of critical electric and water services, we have a responsibility to our customers to continue to deliver those circumstances or those services regardless of the circumstances. That means protecting our employees and critical infrastructure. We do this by 24/7 monitoring, patrolling, investigating, and training. To support this mission, one of the most important things we offer is de-escalation strategy to help with difficult situations. We stress the importance of personal safety and positive conflict resolution whenever possible. Next slide, please. EWEB employs an in-house team of security professionals. As licensed professional security officers, our team adheres to not only EWEB standards and codes of ethics, but also to the additional laws, regulations, and administrative rules set forth by the Oregon Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. Our team has 152 years of combined security, law enforcement, and military experience, including former police and corrections officers, and a combined 62 years of military service. Our security team provides active assailant response training to EWEB staff to prepare folks for the potential of violent threats in the workplace. And we maintain our state-mandated licensing with an in-house instructor to ensure regulatory and legal updates are promptly communicated. We do take a very thoughtful approach when selecting candidates for our physical security team. We look well beyond the basic security officer knowledge that's required by state law. We have a complex and thorough vetting process to ensure we hire only the most qualified individuals. Our officers can and do adapt quickly to unusual and rapidly evolving situations that can impact our entire community. Next slide, please. Again, our ultimate goal is to ensure a safe and secure work environment, followed by protection of our critical infrastructure and assets. One of the best ways to do that is to have an established and robust physical security program, including the presence of security professionals. EWEB security officers are often the first responders to an incident. So to achieve this goal, we do a number of things, which I'll go over with the next couple of slides. We monitor and control access to hundreds of doors and gates at all EWEB facilities. We install, monitor, and maintain hundreds of cameras and electronic card readers at EWEB sites around Oregon. We, again, facilitate de-escalation training to provide communication skills to our field and customer service staff, which has been particularly important as of late. That's a fairly new program for us, and we're excited to offer it. We provide active assailant training to EWEB work groups to respond to workplace violence, which is something we've been doing for quite some time. And we actively patrol EWEB properties and facilities in clearly marked EWEB security vehicles. This has the effect of deterring impacts to facilities, and you'll see on your screen one of our clearly marked patrol vehicles. Next slide, please. In addition to the activities on the previous slide, we also assist employees with challenging interactions. We develop enterprise-wide policies and then also action plans for potential events. And this might be of particular interest to you, although I won't share the details of any specific action plans. We have developed action plans, for example, a civil unrest plan that will outline what steps our security staff take to keep employees and infrastructure safe in the event one of our facilities is the target of violence. We respond to customer and neighborhood concerns and complaints. We manage camping, trash dumping, and other property nuisance issues on EWEB properties to prevent disruption of service or contamination of the water system. And above all else, we're continually adapting to emerging threats. For instance, we actively monitor trends and threats against utilities both regionally and across the nation to ensure we're prepared to respond and maintain resiliency. Please. The geographic scope of the program is actually quite large. EWEB owns over 200 properties, many contain critical infrastructure on them. So our program covers all substations, reservoirs, pump and control stations, and additional properties in and around Eugene. Transition, please. We also cover properties and infrastructure in Springfield and also upriver at Hayden Bridge, Leeburg, Walterville, and Carmen Smith. Next slide, or transition, please. And then our scope extends even further with video surveillance of the Stone Creek Hydroelectric Project east of Portland. So this is a lot of ground to cover with a relatively small team. We're able to accomplish this through a combination of both virtual monitoring and physical patrolling. And we rely pretty heavily on our security systems administration team that works full-time servicing and maintaining hundreds of cameras, electronic access control, and alarm devices that protect against security breaches or service interruption. Next slide, please. One of the ways we monitor our effectiveness is through maintaining statistics of incidents. These are provided in the quarterly reports to the board. I'll walk through just a couple of those things here on this slide. So for background of this slide, the physical security program has evolved pretty dramatically over the last 10 years or so. At that time, security officers were focused primarily on the headquarters and Roosevelt Operations Center, and were not conducting routine patrols at other sites. We have since instituted proactive patrols at most EWEB locations. An example of how this strategy has positively impacted us is shown in this graph. In 2013, where the large orange bar is, we had 24 incidents of copper theft at our substations alone. Aside from the hundreds of thousands of dollars required for repair and replacement, I'm sure you all are familiar with the fact that unsafe removal of copper ground wires or other elements can create unsafe conditions or disrupt service. Since we implemented proactive patrols in marked EWEB patrol vehicles, incidents of copper theft have dropped to nearly zero. And we view this as sound evidence that our physical presence has effectively deterred impacts to facilities. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Ken Baldwin, who's our Physical Security Supervisor. Ken?
Thank you, Lisa. Our physical security team has a lot of encounters with our citizens, including many of those who are in challenging situations. While our primary mission is to provide safety for our employees and protect EWEB's ability to continue to provide service, our approach to citizen contacts is based on dignity, respect, and compassion. We carry helpful flyers with us in our patrol vehicles, listing dozens of community assistance resources, and we hand them out as often as we can. We recognize that we all have a unique story to tell. Sometimes the best approach to an encounter on our properties is simply to listen to what they have to say. By hearing the details of one's circumstances, we can possibly help them find resources, options, things to help them resolve the situation they may be in. One thing we're quite proud of is that with the hundreds of challenging encounters with folks in the field, we've never had a related injury to our officers or any community members. That speaks highly to our communication skills and the compassion with which we approach everyone that we deal with. Slide, please. We're here to detect and prevent threats to our utility, not to be Big Brother. We're not watching every move folks make. We really don't care what our employees are doing out there as long as they're being safe. So instead, we use our resources to identify risks and potential harm that may come to our staff and the community. The relationships that we build within the utility and with other government entities allows for rapid solutions to pretty much any situation. While we do have a large geographical area to cover, we believe more success can be had through broad personal reach of relationships throughout the community. Whether we're supporting the Board of Commissioners, our management, our staff, or our community, our security team strives to help everyone feel secure to continue their daily tasks without worrying about anything hindering them from their job duties. Slide, please. The few photos we're going to show you here. During the initial response to the COVID-19 pandemic, many communities around Oregon adopted a shelter-in-place strategy. We encountered an increase in unhoused citizens using our properties for refuge. Since they had neither they had neither the shelter nor a place, we joined with other government entities by not issuing trespass notices unless situations were impacting our ability to provide water and power to the community. This first photo is an example of how one such encampment got a little out of control, so we unfortunately did have to redirect these people elsewhere and help them find another place to move on. Transition. It's not unusual to encounter this many needles from illicit drug use on a single visit to some of our properties. For the safety of our workers and the residents who occasionally transit the properties, we follow safe work practices to collect and dispose of these hazardous drug paraphernalia, such as the needles and other things we encounter. Transition, please. Campers and rubbish blocking the gates to a substation, for instance, may hinder our first responders and troubleshooters from accessing the apparatus, which delays in restoration of power to the community. This photo shows where a camp spread across the access path to a substation in just a few days. We did have to intervene and get some assistance from the city of Eugene to conduct a cleanup of this property. This is often a complaint-driven process from community members and neighbors, and we respond to all of our residents as quickly as possible. And again, we do try to use as much respectful dialogue with the folks that we're dealing with to resolve these situations. Slide, please. Many employees and customers have commented that our visible presence helps them feel safer, especially with the recent events and sometimes violent civil unrest occurring around our area. We've developed mitigation and response plans to ensure if any violent or destructive activities do spread to our facilities, we're prepared to ensure the safety of our staff and our customers. We often provide additional security for customer care events, community support activities, and to ensure Board of Commissioner meetings are safe for all participants. We provide strategies and examples to our staff for safely resolving encounters with agitated or angry folks who may be impacted by events that are out of their control. We know we can't always avoid conflict, but with helpful communication tools, we can lessen risk and achieve acceptable resolutions. When critical incidents happen, our 24/7 patrol officers may be the first initial responder on scene. We follow the incident command system for safely managing incidents until other qualified agencies can respond. We've established very good relationships with police, fire, homeland security, and emergency management agencies around the area to help provide a unified response to any events where we can be of assistance and help minimize negative impacts to the community. And we're very proud of our physical security team that we continue to maintain full operational capacity throughout this COVID-19 pandemic. And we've adapted our strategies to meet the challenges presented by the change in operational and customer service methods by the utility. And I thank you for the opportunity to highlight how our department supports the EWEB and community. I hand it back to Lisa.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Holly. At this point, we'd like to open it up for questions or comments from the board.
All right, I'll just show you my clock there. We've got 13 out of 20 minutes elapsed, so 7 minutes or so remaining in this session, and I will open up a queue. Go ahead, John.
Sorry to always go first, but it's better than having to deal with me in person. Number one, I'd just like to compliment your segment of EWEB operations as being excellent. I'm really impressed with what you do and the challenges you have based on some of my experience in dealing with some of the unhoused and things such as that along the riverbanks. I do have a question, Lisa, or whatever. A while back, we got College Hill Reservoir got broken into, and some people got into the water supply, I believe. And we found out that our reservoirs and our facilities were not on a priority call from EPD. They didn't consider them critical structure, infrastructure, so they didn't respond to the alarm. Has that been changed and verified that that's been changed throughout all our facilities?
I'll be honest, I don't know. I would have to defer that question to Ken. And if you don't have the answer to that, that's certainly something we can follow up on.
I'd like to follow up on that later and give you some actual details rather than just conjecture, Commissioner.
Okay, well, thank you. It was at College Hill, and it was a group of youth that broke in, and I believe it was when Roger was here, and we found out that we were wondering why the police didn't come, and they didn't come because they didn't consider it a critical infrastructure because we weren't on the list, and I thought that was a little alarming, and I just want to confirm that it got changed.
One thing I would just add to that, and Ken, please correct me if I'm wrong. You know, one of the benefits, primary benefits of having such a qualified in-house security team is that, as you well know, EPD and other law enforcement agencies are extremely busy, and so our officers are trained to be able to respond to events and then liaise with law enforcement and have great relationships so that they can actually stress the importance of an event to EPD or other law enforcement agencies. Ken, anything to add or change on that response?
No, I think you hit it well. Again, with our varying experience and honestly our great reputation with the agencies around, we're able to triage an incident pretty much, and we can determine whether they need to be there urgently or emergently, and help them decide what resources they need to allocate. So frequently we can bring things down to the point of a community service officer, for instance, coming out and simply taking a report rather than dedicating the other resources, which are in other places in the community. I think we're pretty successful with that.
Okay, thank you. Right. I'll look forward to your response on that. Thanks.
Go ahead, Dick.
Well, I just want to appreciate the presentation. It's obvious to me that our expertise and our approach and our relationships with others have matured considerably over the last several years, and your presentation has kind of opened my eyes to that in ways that give me confidence. The only thought that I have, and it's probably irrelevant for the remainder of my tenure, because it's possible that we may never meet again physically through the end of the year, but as far as your training goes, it sounds like you have considerable expertise and maybe some recommended protocols for various kinds of incidents. And if there's an opportunity sometime in the coming year to conduct, and if the other board members and the new ones have an interest, if there's an opportunity to conduct a training for the board that would not be part of a regular public meeting on response to potential incidents in the boardroom, everything from unruly people unwilling to yield the floor during public testimony to other sorts of things. It might be helpful to at least line out kind of how we all behave and respond in those situations should they occur. And I again, probably doesn't need to be something, or wouldn't be particularly useful between now and whatever time it is that we can reconvene physically. But it sounds like you have lots of good training, expertise, and protocols to recommend. And if you could share some of that with us as it applies to things that go on in the boardroom, potentially that would be helpful and useful in the event that we're faced with something like that. Thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to respond to that, we would absolutely be, we'd be thrilled to provide some training in a non-public session. And since you opened the door, having been at EWEB and have a fair amount of experience with EWEB and made reference to how much the program has really evolved over the last number of years, I did want to acknowledge Nate Watto. So Ken Baldwin is acting physical security supervisor. You've been in the job, what, a couple months now, Ken? And Ken's been doing a great job, but I did want to acknowledge Nate Watto, who has been leading that program for a number of years, and under his leadership has really expanded and improved it. So just wanted to get that out there.
Thanks, Lisa. Other questions, concerns, comments? Go ahead, Sonia.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciate having this background knowledge of the staff. You know, in the 4 years that I've been here, this is the first that it's really come up and been detailed in a broader way. So I appreciate having more of that background about the staff and the approach. My sense is that you're doing all of the right things, and like Dick, I feel like we could also learn from your approach on the board and would welcome some sort of, you know, other training outside of this. I know there have been times, even when I was, you know, board president and leading meetings, that people were unruly at times, and it's just helpful to have, you know, you may not need to pull out all of those tools, but it gives you confidence and comfort in knowing what tools are available and how to be able to use those. And it seems like right now, especially with heightened emotions and such, it's even more important to have de-escalating tactics. And we're not meeting in person now, but we are still encountering people. A lot of the staff, I know, they're meeting one-on-one with community members. So I appreciate any work that you're doing to give them those tools as well. So thank you again for all this work. I know it's not easy work, but it's really critical work, and it often doesn't get the attention or focus. When things are just working behind the scenes, a lot of times we take that for granted, and I don't want to do that. So thank you again for what you're doing. It's so critical.
I'll also just quickly throw in some comments. Thanks both Lisa and Ken for the presentation. And like Sonia, she's been here 4 years, I've been here 8. I don't think we've had a presentation like this in the time that I've been here. So, thanks to Frank as well for recognizing that it's time to sort of include this in our, in some kind of an annual review. I think there's some value to having some kind of a, whether it's a presentation or a backgrounder, I suppose, could be discussed and debated, but where the board just gets an annual update as to, I guess I would leave it to you to think through what kinds of metrics ought to be included in that kind of update, the numbers of camps removed or break-ins, or you would have to, lead on that. I wouldn't know enough to advise on that, but I can imagine some kind of an annual report, if for no other reason, to help the board sort of keep clear about the reality of physical risk. It's not something that I think of all that much because it doesn't get brought to our attention. So just simply by bringing it to our attention reminds us of how much, physical assets and human assets we have spread out across Lane County and beyond, and what it means to protect them over time, especially in changing times. Commissioner Schlossberg or anybody else have, we're a minute or so over, but we'll extend just to make sure everybody has a chance to provide some feedback if they'd like.
Nope, I just want to echo what the other commissioners have said. Thank you. That was super informative. And also, I too would appreciate some kind of board training on general safety. So, but thank you for that presentation. It was great.
So, Commissioner Carlson, go ahead.
Sorry, one last comment. Of course, in these times, I think it's really prudent to mention. I'd be curious to find out what other kind of training that you all receive around, sensitivity training, racially motivated sorts of, incidents, and how to respond to people empathetically and in a de-escalating way when there are heightened tensions around that as well. So I didn't hear as much of that in there, but I'm assuming that is something that you do, and if it's not, then I would like to know why. So anyway, just putting that out there as the last item. Thanks.
I'll just summarize. It sounded like pretty widespread interest in some kind of a board level training for how to handle a range of incidents that might happen in the boardroom directly. My own sense is, given that 2 of us are departing in 3 months and 2 other folks are coming on the board, perhaps delay until January for that's usually a slow time of year for the board on the board's calendar anyways, and that way can, unless Dick feels otherwise, I would just think to make it such that those folks could benefit from us, and Dick and I will limp along between now and December without it. Frank, I heard some interest in also in some kind of an annual, whether it's a report, a presentation, a backgrounder. Guess I would leave that to you and Lisa to discuss, but it seems like there's interest in keeping this somewhat visible to the board, at least on an annual basis.
Yeah, President Mattel, I think we all agree there's some natural opportunities when we do the annual report to look at that, and then any kind of noteworthy security updates could be quarterly as well. So I think Lisa touched on that at the very beginning. That would include a number of different metrics and activities that we'd be working on at the time. And then if something like this is informative, doing something like this for the board just on its own merits once a year, just as an update for the board. There's a lot of things that evolve in this world, and knowing that we have a a professional and dedicated staff for this purpose is, I think, really important to all of us. I would also add I think, we will probably add something like this to the new commissioner orientation going forward, so that something like a de-escalation training, well, I agree it's probably an early next year, given that we'll be mostly virtual, if not all and completely virtual between now and the end of the year, that we would also add it to the list of things that we would work on potential, presumptive new commissioners on in the future.
All right, well, thanks once again to Ken and Lisa both.
Thank you.
All righty, I'm looking at the agenda. We are scheduled to take a 5-minute break. It's 7:16 anyways, according to my clock. So we will do that 5-minute break. See you all at 7:21.
Yeah, President Mattel?
Yes, sir.
I am going to exit and try to reconnect. My computer or my network is incredibly slow. And so I'm going to try to reconnect in.
Good luck. May the force be with you. we're going to, for folks who can hear me, we are going to extend the break an additional 5 minutes to, well, anyways, to 7:25. Our fearless leader, General Manager Lawson, is having trouble rebooting. So pressure's on, Frank. You got to 7:25.
Hey, Steve. Any tips on the Middle Fork?
Tips for what? Fishing or rafting?
I think I get some advice from you.
Well, you've been down more times than me. But I'll tell you what. I guess maybe you don't have to worry about this so much because you got some folks guiding. But the water is low. We we beached on more than one rock and did some damage to some boats. So I think that's the main thing. But man, it was fun.
Yeah, we're down. I think it's one. Yeah, but how they get the sweep boat down with the logistics and the gears for being on the river for 10 days is beyond me. They get that sweep boat down like that, Hell's Half Mile and all those places. It's just amazing how they get it down there, but they do it.
Are you flying into, what's it like?
Indian Creek? No. We're starting at Boundary Creek.
Wow, really? Wow.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure it out. My back is killing me from being on the dirt for a few days, and I'm going to go do it again.
We stayed away from all the hot springs, just trying to, reduce our interactions with folks from other parties because of COVID. So I don't know. So that was a thing. And you could tell other people, I think, were largely thinking the same thing because those that you could see from floating by were pretty empty.
Yeah, we're flying out at either Cougar Lane or Thomas Creek at the end of next week, and so I just got a plane just to pick my son and myself up rather than flying with. Usually they put 3 or 4 people in those planes, and I just said I don't want strangers.
If you get to camp at Otter Bar, I thought that was the best camp on the river, but I guess those decisions are probably made for you, Fred.
Yeah, we pick them before we start. You got to pick them for the logistics and how many miles you go each day and everything. But we don't have any competition. There's nobody else on the river this time of the year.
All righty. Let's see. Do we have? I can see 3 out of 5. Sonia, are you here? Mindy, are you here? There's Mindy. And there's Sonia. Oh, great. Alrighty, well, we will reconvene. We're all, the gang's all back. Frank, I believe the floor is yours. 30 minutes to discuss the McKenzie Valley Service Territory and rate making. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, President Mattel, Commissioners. Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity. A backgrounder was provided to the board, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on presentation other than to highlight a few of the diagrams and facts and figures kind of behind the scenes. Go ahead with slide 34, please. Just as a quick overview, a reminder of the service territory that we're talking about. Roughly, EWEB's total is about 236 square miles. We have a little over 90,000 accounts or customer accounts split between residential, small commercial, medium and large general service, and then a couple of contracts in addition to that. The McKenzie Valley represents about a little under 3% of our total customer accounts and a little over 3% if you look at just residential accounts. And as you can see, a pretty substantial part of our territory from a geographical perspective. Go ahead with slide 35, please. So one of the things that has come up relative to rate making principles is, where does this fit relative to other things we've done and continue to plan to do over the next several years. If you look back about 10 years, there's been a number of rate making activities that we've done, especially around this notion of equity. Above the timeline represents the electrical side. Below the timeline, there indicates where we've made some changes. relative to the water rate making and rate structures. Anything from adjustments to basic charges to try to work on alignment between fixed costs and variable costs, or fixed costs and marginal costs as well. We also, and this is really captured in table 2 of your backgrounder, which has a list by year, everything from eliminating tiers on the electric side to looking at how we do pumping charges, for example. On the water side, the G there is when we eliminated the 15-year distributed general rate for local distributed generation. And then the one that's called general customer, the black figure there, was when we aligned fees and costs associated with customer service activities. That was a couple years ago. And then the most recent one, actually earlier this year, was when we adjusted the SDC charges on water for auxiliary dwelling units. And so, but when also you look at the future, there's a number of things that we really have to work on over the next several years, especially around on the electric side, looking at consumption choices. More work remains that'll facilitate future consumer choices based on energy resources, time of use, peak mitigation, and carbon intensity, just for example. So there's a lot of work to do on the rate making front and the structure of rates, especially on the electric side over the next several years as we look to offer new products with new kinds of value. Go ahead with slide 36 if you'd like. As part of the backgrounder, we also included rate comparisons between EWEB and some of our neighbors, in particular Lane Electric. And the one thing that jumps out pretty quickly is the difference in the basic charge or the fixed charge associated, and differences between Lane and EPUD and EWEB, for example. And that becomes more evident in the upcoming couple of slides. Go ahead with slide 37. One of the things when you lay on top of this, the different rates, one of the things that is, whenever you make a rate adjustment, people talk about, well, you're increasing, these people are paying more and these people are paying less. The reality of it is every one of those lines is up and to the right, meaning that as you increase consumption levels across the bottom, what you pay goes up. And so while we've looked at tiers differently, we've looked at different mixes of fixed versus variable charges, they all go up and to the right. EWEB is the dark line, kind of in the middle. The one that crosses EWEB, the yellow line, is Emerald Public Utility District, or EPUD. And then there's 2 lines for Lane Electric, all remain above the EWEB line. The reason there's 2 is that they have a winter rate and a summer rate. And so there's some slight, we decided to plot both of those. The winter rate is slightly lower than the summer rate because they have a higher consumption and can plan to absorb more costs over a higher consumption. And so that's part of the reason. Go ahead with the next slide. This is an interesting one when you look at the impact of basic charges on consumption and what you pay. I'll start with the 2 lines that are close together. Those are how EWEB, an EWEB monthly bill, would compare with Lane Electric when you look at different levels of consumption. And so, for example, if you look at a bill that's roughly 800 kilowatt hours a month, those numbers are a little over 10% lower. So EWEB would be 10% lower than either of the rates, the winter or summer, from Lane Electric at 800. When you go out to 1600, 1700, 2000, that closes to 4.7%. We are 4.7% below Lane's winter rate and 6.8% below Lane Electric's summer rate as you get out into higher consumption levels. The one line that crosses there, that's Emerald Public Utility District, or EPUD. And so up to about 900 kilowatt hours a month, you'll pay less from EWEB versus you'll pay slightly more from EWEB if you have higher levels of consumption. And so you can really see the impact of the higher basic charges Lane and from EPUD when you look at the low end of the consumption scale there. Go ahead with the next slide, please. One of the things I think to recognize too about the McKenzie Valley, just in general, is that we do have a presence up there that goes beyond the service territory. The investments that have been made since about 2000, total, just capital alone, total over $150 million. You know, of that, 90% of those roughly relate to hydro facilities and hydro relicensing. You know, of that 140 or so million, about 50% of the Carmen Smith and about 40% of Leeburg and Walterville, those investments were in non-electricity generating activities. So what that means is fish and recreation and habitat, resource management. So the presence of, and in fact, part of relicensing is to invest in the community in ways that go beyond just investing, for example, in a powerhouse or a generator. Additionally, and one thing as kind of mentioned in your backgrounder, EWEB has also invested over $15 million in the non-capital O&M programs specific to watershed and source protection since about its inception in about 2002. And those are not included in electric rates, by the way. So we have invested significantly upriver, well beyond what we recapture in electric rates directly. Go ahead with slide 40. So, you know, as you can see, my recommendation is on the screen. You know, I made this recommendation based on some judgment that indeed the territory has unique attributes of cost and based on the fact that nowhere in our rate making principles or policies could I find a mechanism to not make this recommendation unless to treat it as a de minimis subsidy. So, or I couldn't find a way to use a non-cost based reasoning to make a different recommendation to the board that would overcome the rough $800,000 shortfall that this particular territory costs versus what's recovered. And so that's the purpose of my recommendation, as well as to foster a little bit of discussion, because unlike many of the issues and recommendations that we present, in this case, I don't expect complete alignment on the board, and therefore welcome some additional conversation, perspectives, and guidance. And so that's why I presented it this way, is to really foster some communications and discussion, especially this being a little bit premature, recognizing that up front that we have not had our upriver meeting yet. And so this is in preparation or in maybe staging that a bit. So that's the recommendation. And I would, I guess, turn it back to you, President Mattel, to lead any further discussions or comments that can help us prepare for our upriver meeting in a couple weeks, and also help us prepare to as far as what to bring back to the board after that, gauged on that input as well. I don't want to be at all premature to that, and so I would welcome any further discussion or questions. I think that's the next slide, which is questions. No, I guess I don't have any questions. You can't, I guess, ask any questions since there's no question slide, but.
Well, I'll just say a couple of, thanks for the presentation. I'll say a couple quick things and then open up a queue. Yeah, just to follow on what Frank said as a reminder, to whatever it is, 2-3 weeks from now, we have our upriver meeting. There are, we've kind of worked through what that agenda will include, and of course it includes this topic. I think Frank has volunteered Deborah to lead the presentation, although I think he's going to join her at least a bit. In any case, it'll be a short presentation, probably fairly similar to this one, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for as many as long as people have you know, questions or comments or whatever else to throw at us, and there'll be an opportunity for commissioners to respond if they so choose. So we're basically structuring that although it's not actually public testimony, sort of structured in that way where we can hear the comments and concerns. So this is really an opportunity for us to kind of work through whatever concerns or issues we have individually. 2 or 3 weeks from now, when we meet, the plan is more to listen and less to sort of to provide any direct commentary or feedback, but to really hear what the upriver folks say. So anyways, that's just a little bit of preamble so folks have a sense of what's coming in the next a couple of weeks from now. Sonia, it sounds like you wanted to jump in the queue first, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the background information. I'm not going to give very much thoughts on the proposal right now, because one of the things that was brought up at the last meeting that resonated with me and finding out more information about it was one of the other commissioners, I can't remember if it was John or Dick, but brought up that the silt taxes, the contributions in lieu of taxes for the city, that there's some kind of an interplay there. I don't know what that is, other than I know that we make those to the city of Eugene. I don't know what our, I would like to know more about how that figure is calculated, and if that is on everything that we do, which includes all of the upriver. Kind of wondering if it should or shouldn't, and also how that plays into the service that they get provided or not, and how that kind of wraps into the COSA. So I didn't see that in any of the presentation, and I remember that being an item that there was some question about, and I would like to get more of that information before I provide more feedback on the proposal. I'd also like to hear the upriver people kind of give their feedback before I really make any judgment as well. But that's the one thing I would like to see more. Thank you.
So thank you, Commissioner. I will provide a little bit of feedback directly, and then we can provide more details as to the specifics behind the actual equation that drives the calculation of silt. It is a combination of a couple of things. One is relative to wholesale business. There's some assumption levels that were made because wholesale markets go up and down. So I don't want to say that's a fixed amount, but it's a predetermined amount. On the retail side, silt is calculated based on the revenue we receive from all customers. It's an overall revenue based calculation. And so that includes electric and water, and also whether you're upriver or in town. That's a real cost that is incurred by the utility based on revenue from everybody. Now, I don't know exactly when that silt agreement expires. That's something that either Deborah can weigh in on or we can follow up on, but I don't think it's any time in the near future. And we can get some more information. It's a spreadsheet that looks at all the different classes as well, but it's basically calculated off of the entire revenue, retail revenue, plus some factor that accounts for wholesale revenue.
Okay, so when you provide that information too, can you let me know if the agreement was in, I mean, if it's in lieu of taxes, I'm assuming that's property taxes because we're a government entity, and so if the property is what we're kind of offsetting, maybe I'm wrong there, but if you could correct me on that when you come back and bring more information, I would appreciate that, and kind of what the offset.
Right, and some of this, yeah, some of this is driven by state statute, which requires public utilities pay this fee. And then there's a part of it that was just negotiated from a historical perspective. The last negotiation, I believe, was between Roger Gray and City Manager John Reese a number of years ago. And I don't know when that particular one expires, but we can provide that. And I saw Deborah jump on real quick. I don't know if she had an inclination as to when it expires. You're on mute, Deborah. Join the club.
All right, sorry about that. I was just going to comment on the retail side. We can get you the expiration on the wholesale agreement. The retail side is perpetuity until we renegotiate. That was a negotiated deal based on the state statute. And it does, the calculation is off all of our retail revenue. So as written, we are not permitted to exclude revenue from upriver.
All right, well, I'll jump in the queue just to move things along. So I'll go on record saying that I'm in favor of the recommended action with some modifications, because I too was kind of moved by whoever it was, Dick or John, who mentioned the silt impact, and I think it's roughly 3%, or that's certainly what the utility, or no, I guess it's a little bit more, 5-6%, something like that. What we owe the city on as each year. And so to me, it does make sense to, to subtract that off the, the impact, or just to subtract that out. And so what we might end up by offering the upriver folks, recognizing that they are, in a sense, paying those taxes and shouldn't have to do that if they're not, if they're not benefiting from city services. So I could imagine that we would back down that rate increase by some percent to accommodate that. So that's a piece that I'd like to see further discussion on. But generally speaking, I'm in support for all the reasons Frank mentioned, that this is the impact here is in excess of 3 to 5% is where we start to really take an interest. And for all the standard reasons that we've already discussed, it's our job to try and reduce and eliminate to the extent possible cross subsidies, and we find them when we find them, we address them when we do. It's some folks get the benefit of the time it takes for us to to catch up with those things, but that's doesn't seem to me to be a reason not to pursue just because we've allowed it for some period of time. And the other thing I'll say is that there has been this on again off again discussion with some of the rural utilities, Lane Electric in particular, to perhaps buy out that part of our service territory, and that's in recognition that they are better tooled to deal with rural issues, and we are less tuned in that way. And the last time this came up at the Upriver meeting, we had an enormous number of people come out and say, please don't do this. We love EWEB, but the reality was they liked the difference in cost. And so I think we ought to be, if it turns out that we are subsidizing them, we ought to clarify that issue. And then we will see in much more, just kind of real terms where if it really is of benefit or interest to the upriver customers to transition to a different utility, and that utility may express greater interest, recognizing that they don't have the burden of having to raise rates on folks right away, that those issues have been cleared from the table. So those are some of my reasons for moving forward with this. I'll open it up to anybody else who wants to chime in. Go ahead. It looks like everybody wants to get in. Go ahead, John.
Well, thank you. I'm favored conceptually for this. I think I may have been the one that brought up the silt, but it doesn't matter. But Frank, I know that we pay the city of Eugene like $12 million a year, but we also pay the city of Springfield about $1 million a year for revenue we generate within their boundaries. So why couldn't logic, to make this a little bit more fair, for the revenue we generate outside the incorporated areas, that silt go to the county and dedicated to something like their fire departments or schools or whatever, because in essence, we do it in other regional jurisdictions. And you don't need to answer that now, but I would just think conceptually, if 6% of your bill is going to go to an entity that provides nothing for you, we give money to Springfield, we give money to Eugene for what we generate in those geographic areas. I don't know why we couldn't do the same for the unincorporated areas up the hill. Just a food for thought. And then secondarily, on Steve's point about the territory and maybe swapping with Lane or somebody else. Our previous general manager lived up on Spring Boulevard, and he had Lane Electric. They provide service in the city limits of Eugene all over, and it would seem logical that if we could somehow figure out the economics of territory swaps or service swaps and things such as that, and make the pot right, it would make more sense for why have Lane Electric in an urban area and in the city of Eugene, et cetera. And then, you know, also then the people up the river could have representation, because right now they have no say in anybody. I mean, it's kind of default to Mindy, and I was in that position for 4 years, and we had a lot of fun discussions, but you know, hopefully we could pursue that. I'd like to see more of that in what you come back with. Thank you.
Mindy, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Frank, did you want to respond to anything that John said?
I was just going to mention he used the word logic several times, and I can't explain some of the historical logic. I can definitely say that we have a good relationship with Lane Electric. We can open dialogues that are logical around service territories and swaps. And I do think that the big issue that we struggled with, you know, I'm not sure it's a struggle with. I think one of the big issues is representation. The way that co-ops and PUDs are formed is kind of a natural process. I don't think we're trying to unload a territory. I think we want to look at this, what's the best for the customers. And if you know, service is there, the price is there, the representation is there, then it would likely be something that a co-op or a PUD would also be interested in. So I think there's some natural logic, to use Commissioner Brown's term, but I cannot explain all of the logic around silt and its origins, especially the way that we do it now. So, but we'll see what we can do.
Commissioner Schlossberg, go ahead.
So there's something about this that just makes me a little uncomfortable, and I'm trying to figure out why. And I shudder to read back the minutes next month because I'm not very eloquent in presenting it. But I think part of it is silt. A big part of it is representation. So if we were looking at a different area of town, like let's say we decided we were going to look at South Hills because they have more down trees, and we were going to look at how much it costs us to provide electricity there. They have direct representation, and so I feel like that's one of the things that makes EWEB special. And here, I don't know, it just feels a little off to me that people upriver don't have that. And I guess the other thing is, I understand that there's a whole queue and there's a plan of when we do make these types of decisions, but just earlier in the meeting we were talking about people who are needing shutoffs or non-compliance for paying bills, and I guess I would just want to know what the timeline would be if we implemented any kind of rate increase, because that feels a little just off to me right now to be talking about that. Again, I understand that we're a business and business has to go on, but there's just something that doesn't sit right with me.
So I can't explain what's not sitting right with you, but I will say that there's potentially two steps. One is that the board would authorize the creation of a rate. If you then look at the other principles, one of those is gradualism, and there could be, you know, that's one of the principles that we could employ here. So it would depend on the board's comfort around the level and the pace of those changes and what that would look like. The flip side to doing this now is a recognition that they've underpaid for a number of years. And so at what point do you say, oh, it's time to pay your fair share? So and we'll ease you into that given the circumstances. So there's a couple ways to look at that. I think if the board says, yeah, we're comfortable with the rate because there's enough distinction, then that rate could start being, you know, just the difference in silt. It could progress over time. I mean, whatever, there's ways to do that. So the timing is a little bit separate from the decision to have a McKenzie Valley rate itself.
Yeah, I think about it that way myself. Sorry, Dick, I'm sure you probably want to jump in. That you know, if everybody had the time and interest to look fully into these issues the way we are and the way we do as board members, you could imagine, of course, there would be a bunch of people from the upriver community that would, you know, say, this doesn't feel fair, I don't want this, or please don't do this to me. But there would be, you know, 10 or 20 times as many people to say, what, I'm helping to pay an extra $800,000 and have been for the last 25 or 30 years. For these folks, that doesn't seem right either. It's your obligation to, remove that subsidy from me. So there's both sides of those things. Neither of those groups are going to come in full because they're just simply not aware and don't have the time. It's really up to us to sort it out. Dick, I'm sure you want to jump in. Oh, you're muted, sir.
Now I'm unmuted. I feel as sort of secure in my opposition to this as some of you do in your support. And I don't mean that as a joke. I just I look at it from a different perspective, and I think you're focused on the cost of service perspective as though that were in and of itself equity. I'm going to just make a statement about this that represents my view. I guess I'll stay open to a final outcome as we move through whatever our process is, but I do not support the recommended action. And my statement around that is that we have a major presence in the McKenzie watershed. We have for a century, and this is a presence both in terms of our facilities and operations that has a significant impact on the upriver community. Whether it's varying the water levels up there or the major construction that we engage or the vegetation management that we do, all of the things that we are involved in up there represent an impact to that community. We also at the same time have historically and continue to obtain major benefits from our presence and our utilization of that resource, both on the electric side and on the water supply side. We committed to serving those folks a long time ago, fully with the understanding that it would cost us more. It's a rural area. It's a less dense area in terms of capital investment. It's an area that's exposed to more reliability issues. That's not new information. I guess we've never chosen to run a cost of service study on that. But I mean, to the extent that we find ourselves surprised at this point that that's the case, I think we've known that, at least as I've seen it over the years all along, and have seen that as an appropriate trade-off against the equity considerations that have to do with our presence up there. And so for me, equity as a rate-making consideration is not just cost of service, it's the balancing of all of the factors that affect not only the quality, but the nature of service and the way that people obtain whatever the benefits they do from us. I would also point out that we do pay silt to the city of Eugene, which we're obligated to do, and I'm sure you will get the details on that, but the bottom line is it's 6% of their revenues, which provide little or no direct benefit. If we were not a public entity, we would pay property taxes on all of our holdings upriver to Lane County, which would accrue to the benefits of the school districts and other functions upriver, which I would hasten to say are probably much greater than the $700,000 that would otherwise accrue to those folks. In fact, for the fact that in lieu of taxes that we pay for not having to pay those property taxes, those go to the city of Eugene, not the upriver interests. So I guess what I'm saying is, in the balance of considerations and the history of this, I think that relationship has been important to us, and we've seen that as a valid trade-off against the benefits that the EWEB and its down in town citizens receive as a result. And I don't see any significant change in that sense of the balance of equity here. And for that reason, it would be difficult for me to support this change. And I realize that purely technically, from a cost of service standpoint, and I guess I'd point out again that that's essentially a tool, and that equity really balances a lot more than just that, including some of the things that I've referenced here. So for that reason, I'm uncomfortable with it, and I guess like Misty, feel a sense of discomfort around that. There's also a timing issue here, and the fact that we're in COVID mode, we're not going to have much of an engagement with those folks, and we're not anywhere down the road in terms of a re-engagement with Lane Electric. We've got issues around our presence up there coming up next year with respect to decisions on the hydro project. So I just question, even if this did make sense and was an appropriate policy shift, of whether this is the right time to take it on for the benefit of something approaching 0.5% in interest to the rest of the customers. And I know I've exceeded my time. I've also exhausted my arguments.
Well, thanks, Dick. Well, we are probably out of time, at least that which we, just slightly, that we allotted for ourselves to discuss this issue, but it's a big issue and we're going to have some follow up and probably a lot of heated, feedback from the community in a couple of weeks. So we can extend a minute or two or more if folks want to, follow up, especially on what Dick had to say, because as usual, he's the most eloquent. And in this case, express some good counter arguments. Go ahead, John.
Well, Dick, while I don't totally disagree with everything you said, I do have some, some comparisons too. You talk about EWEB being up there and having their facilities not paying taxes. Well, it's no different than the Corps of Engineers and the dams that they run, and the benefit or lack of benefit you get from their presence, or the Forest Service having their headquarters up there, et cetera. I mean, it's all intertwined and everything else. And the fact that we haven't been doing it right in fiscal management, at least in my opinion, for decades doesn't mean that we can't make it right. It's if the water line's been leaking for decades doesn't mean we can't repair it and do a better job, because I think that's it. So I'm not ready to move on this. I'm ready to have a better discussion about this with others, because I don't think it's fair, like Steve said, to go out and have the people here. I know Minnie has a concern about raising rates, but you got to remember that the people here that can't pay their bill are paying a higher rate, albeit not much, but a higher rate, because they're subsidizing the people up the river. And there's a lot of absentee owners up there that pay a really, really low base charge, because we're 30% below the others. They don't occupy their homes 6-8 months out of the year. So, but yet we provide service to them when they need it. So I'm gonna support moving forward and having a better dialogue. I'm concerned that we're not going to get a very good turnout with the meeting on the 22nd, just because of the restricted infrastructure up there. But I share your concerns, but I'm not ready to say no. I'm ready to say, give me some more information.
Frank, I saw your hand up. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just gonna, so the one thing I think that Commissioner Helgeson does point out, which is really accurate, is that the equity principle is probably the most squishy, and becomes that way because of kind of the ongoing values of the utility in relationships to customer owners. Now, as part of that, I would also, we do have a presence upriver, and we have invested heavily in upriver. That goes well beyond the fact that we have some generating facilities. We've invested in things that have nothing to do with generation itself, and also we've invested in the watershed, which is incredibly important and ongoing for our water utility. And so I think that's, if you're going to look at one side of that particular issue, you need to look at the other side. And in fact, the canal, we are obligated to make investments in the canal upcoming to manage water for at a minimum and potentially generation as a maximum. That'll be a decision that the board has to make, and that's a pretty heavy investment. So we've had ongoing investments there. I think we have been as responsible and prudent in our presence up there, and it's been a long one, and I certainly understand that, and I'm open to more discussion as well. Now, this discussion did not just start tonight. It started about 1.5 years ago with Commissioner's request for a COSA, and so it's not a new sort of emerging, oh, here came COVID and let's sneak something through. This has been something for a long time, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have more dialogue around it. I know there's various opinions on it, and it's because the equity piece, when you talk about rate making, is the one that requires the most sort of balance around values, and so I think that's part of the reason that this is not one of those, oh, it's an easy 5-0 vote. Let's do this or let's not do this. And so look forward to more discussion and as well as public input.
Sonia? Muted. Sonia, you're muted. Don't you hate that?
All right.
So annoying.
Can you hear me? Okay, here we go. I'll try to be quick. To John's point, I appreciate the thought that we could potentially fix the unfairness issue around the silt. I think that that's something that we should look into and at least review. I mean, something that's agreed to in perpetuity really should get some look at occasionally. 2, I don't agree that just because we've done something before and that's the way that it has been done, that we shouldn't look at changing that or making it more fair, or at least review it moving forward. So that's where I stand on that. I also appreciate the fact that we do have a number of projects upriver, and if we handed, you know, if we thought that it was beneficial to the community up there as well to look at, you know, potentially moving that into Lane Electric or EPUD or someone of that nature. I don't know how, you know, the voting system for them works. Obviously, I think that people would need to be involved in that conversation. I think that that's another fairness issue that is challenging for us to to really weigh in on. I mean, we are handed that. If there's something we could do to change that and it would be beneficial to the citizens, that's something that we could look into. The last thing I will say is that because we do have so much upriver territory there, and we plan to have more projects potentially in that area, maybe not more projects, but presence in that area. If we transition that over to another utility of some form, I wonder what impact it would have on our ability to operate in that space. I mean, we've already seen kind of territorial issues with other utilities that we're trying to partner with. And so I certainly wouldn't want any of our, you know, current opportunities and presence upriver to be negatively impacted or more costly over the long term, because we just can't get the projects done that we need to, because we now have to, you know, work with another utility that may be less willing to help. I don't know how that territorial situation works up there with current infrastructure, but I think it's something to consider and maybe look at precedent for that as well. Okay, thank you.
Other feedback or thoughts? All right, well, go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, commissioners, I was just gonna, I appreciate the conversation. I have a number of additional, you know, pieces of follow-up to work on around, you know, presence and silt and a number of things related to that, and how there's a significant process associated with service territory transfers around, you know, asset valuation, Bonneville allocations. Just like we are restricted from a charter perspective on having a commissioner represent the upriver community, either a public utility district or a co-op would have their own method of developing and getting authorization to have representation. So, and even along those lines, we're probably talking about a fairly lengthy transition. And our presence will continue around transmission, which is a key piece of it, generation and water, even if we did not have a distribution only presence. So don't want to get ahead of ourselves there. I think the next piece for me is to bring the board back more information, and so I can tease out just that many more different opinions and direction on this. And so I appreciate the conversation. I think it was useful for me to understand where people are at and where are the gaps that I can try and fill.
All right, well, thanks, Frank. I just, in closing this issue out, I'll just say that in, I think perhaps my nearly 8 years on the board, this is probably the issue that has generated the most, sort of opposing opinions. Normally we tend to be fairly like-minded as a board once we've kind of worked through the issues, and it just might not work out that way this time. And so I'm happy for years and years of, friendships and processes to get us through this, regardless of how it turns out. And I'm not looking forward to the final vote, because the worst thing that could possibly happen for me is to end 8 great years on a down, on a down note with Dick. But we'll just have to see how that goes. All right. Well, we'll move on to correspondence and board agendas.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm sorry. I was looking away. Sonia, did you have something you wanted to say?
Only that Dick wanted to talk. I mean,
sorry, Dick.
I don't think he was given a second round.
I'm sorry. Just so you know, the way the camera is, I can't see when you raise your hand. But and sorry about that. Go ahead. And you're muted.
Thank you. Just a couple last points. One is, I don't take this stuff personally. We can disagree. That's okay. The purpose of the discussion, if nothing else, is to understand each other and to kind of consolidate our viewpoint and know where we are. And at the end of the day, while I may not be able to join whatever the majority perspective is on this, I feel bound to make my points. And having done that, I feel honored in the discussion. But it's not simply that we can't change because we've done something for 100 years. I'm making the point based on the equity considerations. And I guess my point is that from my perspective, the trade-off in the equity view hasn't changed all that much. So I'm not feeling a need to treat it. And I'm not hearing from all of you yet exactly what it is in your consideration in that value trade-off that has shifted such that it's appropriate to make a change. And so I honor the conversation, and at the end of the day, I may just choose to go quietly. I honor that there's a majority view, and that once a vote is taken, that's the decision. So thank you for your concern about harmony, but I take no offense whatsoever.
So, Dick, in full disclosure, are you putting your hat in to run for the mayor of Leesburg? Is that what's going on here?
I don't think I'm eligible. I don't live in the right place.
just teasing you.
All right. Well, thanks for the conversation all the way around. It's nice to see that there are at least some decision-making bodies, however local, that can manage difficult issues and still be friends. That's a nice thing. All right. Well, we have item number 11. That's correspondence and board agendas. And Frank, that's for you to lead.
Yeah, President Mattel, there was just one item that was in correspondence, and that was a follow-up to our management letter from our annual audit. There were a few comments in there from Deborah, and also updates from Travis Knabe, our manager of IS. And so if there were any questions on that, either of those can answer them. If not, we can move on. I think that was pretty straightforward. As for the future agendas, I did correspond with staff earlier in this meeting. We can incorporate a half an hour into the October meeting regarding the base level reservoir work, particularly at East 40th. And so that's a change that I will bring to President Mattel and Vice President Schlossberg as part of agenda planning, but staff is supportive of that and looks forward to sharing where we're at with those projects, in particular East 40th. So that'll be a change. And then the Upper River meeting is actually 3 weeks from today. It's the 22nd. And so we're trying to prepare as best as possible to engage that community as much as we can. Some of it will be virtual. We're also going to provide standard telephone connections as well, so that if people have limits to bandwidth, they can still participate in some form or another. I view this as more of a very brief presentation, kind of open house / town hall kind of opportunity to present a little bit of information to fuel some discussion, but mostly a listening session relative to the issues up the McKenzie Valley. And so we'll look forward to that. Other than that, I think the agenda is pretty flexible and set, and has somewhat history to it. So this fall we'll start to get into the budgeting process and rate making and rates process.
All righty. We have our board wrap up. Why don't we go downriver to up? John Brown, that's you first.
Okay, thank you. The only thing I have is at the beginning, I forgot to say that I participated in the quarterly OPEB, the post-employment retirement benefit committee meeting, and about their investments and where they are. And obviously, like everybody, they took a hit, but they've come back and they're stronger now. And I'm glad to say that they're doing really well, and I think they're being well run. So all that in a nutshell. That's it.
All right, well, I'm next. I don't think I have anything to add. Good meeting, everybody. Thanks for your participation. I feel like the virtual, component, we're just getting better at it. It feels kind of natural, which I am loath to say, because I ultimately prefer the in-person meetings, but we're getting better at this overall. So thanks to staff, of course, and commissioners alike for making it work reasonably well. Sonia, you're next.
I don't have too much else to add, but do appreciate the dialogue tonight, and recognition that we can work together and have differing opinions. I really appreciate that. I think that is actually what builds stronger teams and gets better decision making. So good discussion. Thanks.
Dick, it's your turn.
I'm pretty much good. Just on the notion of the virtual board meetings, I too feel more comfortable with this. I'm kind of hoping that before we step off the board, we're able to meet once again physically, but maybe that's not going to be the case. I'm kind of wondering what it looks like from those that choose to join the meeting as members of the public, and I feel like we are able to have a good conversation amongst ourselves, but I just have no sense of what this looks like externally. So if anybody out there at the staff level has a feel for that, and maybe nobody's tuned in, so I don't know. But I agree with your point, Steve, but I'm just not sure that I really have a sense of how this plays in Peoria, Thanks.
Yeah, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Commissioner Helgeson, we can provide you with the YouTube link where we broadcast the meetings if you want to go back and take a look at what a live event would look like. I, as a side note, will add that we're doing this as a live event for these types of meetings because there's kind of a set group, and then you're broadcasting the presentations and the interaction live. We'll send all the commissioners that link, by the way. But then the meeting upriver will be a Teams group meeting, which will have a much different feel to it. It'll be 9 people on a screen, a lot like you would expect with some other platform. So it'll be a little different platform than this one. But we'll send you that link so you have. So if you want to peruse it and see what other people see, you can at least get a feel for that.
I probably should be made to do that regardless. I'll be looking forward to seeing that link.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mindy, you're, I guess, second to last. We'll give Frank a chance too. Why not?
All right. Well, I also appreciated tonight's discussion. I think that when we have differing opinions and have an opportunity to discuss things, it actually provides for a more robust look at the issues that we're kind of dealing with. So I appreciate hearing everybody's opinions and thoughts. And then just to echo the compliments for the virtual meetings, a big shout out to all the people behind the scenes that made it happen, that are making these meetings happen, because they are getting easier, and they're also a little bit shorter than our in-person meetings, which I appreciate. That's it.
Frank, any concluding thoughts?
Well, thanks. I actually appreciate the dialogue tonight as well. I think instead of asking for discussion in the future, I'm just going to put something out there and let everybody argue about it. I think that tends to foster some good conversation. No, in all seriousness, I appreciate the fact that there's differing views on this issue and that we need to wrestle through it with some healthy debate. I think that's important. So thank you for that. And I think tonight's producer was Holly. So if things transition well and all that, it was because of Holly, with a lot of help from Anne, who's always there somehow. And then a lot of IS support through the last several meetings. So we're continuing to evolve and get better, and look forward to the next meeting. So thanks for the good conversation. I really do appreciate it. Got a lot out of it.
All right, everybody. With that, we are gavelled out. Good night. See you in 3 weeks.
Yep. Thank you, commissioners.
Bye, everybody.